The night my life changed forever. I was only 20 years old, living in a quiet town in the Philippines. At that age I thought I understood what love meant, but in truth I was just beginning to learn. I married a man named David, who at first seemed gentle and respectful, and my parents believed he was the right choice for me. David lived in the United States, and after the wedding I was expected to follow him there. The idea of leaving everything I knew behind made my chest tighten with fear. I had never been far from my village, never stepped onto an airplane, and I barely knew a word of English. The nights before my departure were filled with tears. I couldn't imagine living without my family, especially my mother, who was my safe place. She cooked for me, hugged me when I was sad, and made even the hardest days feel lighter. When I thought of leaving her, it felt like part of me was being torn away. David stayed in our house for 3 weeks before we traveled, and during that time he rarely spoke. I convinced myself that his silence was only shyness, though my heart was uneasy. The morning of our departure, I packed a few clothes and treasured photographs of my family. My mother pressed a silver bracelet into my hand, whispering, "Keep this with you and stay strong." I clung to her and sobbed as she wept too, both of us afraid of what the future might bring. Saying goodbye felt like someone was pulling my soul from my body. On the plane to New York, I couldn't stop crying, my stomach churned, and my eyes burned with exhaustion. David sat quietly by the window, barely glancing at me, as if my pain was invisible. When the plane finally landed, the cold air shocked me. It was my first time seeing snow so pure and white, yet I felt no joy. The beauty outside didn't reach me because inside, I was drowning in sadness and fear. At the airport, David's father, Mr. Collins, was waiting. He looked strict, with eyes that never softened into a smile. David explained that his mother had stayed home to cook, and soon we drove to their house in New Jersey. Their home was small, dim, and silent, nothing like the warm and noisy house I grew up in. I sat on the bed in the room they gave me, missing my family so much it hurt. That night I lay awake thinking of my parents and my younger brothers, wishing I could run back to them. But I couldn't. I was now a wife, and this was supposed to be my new life. The following morning, Mrs. Collins called me to the kitchen. With a sharp tone, she handed me a list of chores: cleaning, washing dishes, cooking rice, and warned me not to be lazy. Though my English was weak, I understood enough to feel the weight of her words. I worked the entire day until my back ached and my hands turned raw from cold water. David never offered to help. Instead, he sat with his father, drinking coffee and watching television. When I timidly asked him if I could rest, his reply was simple and cold. "My mom likes everything clean. Just try your best." Day after day, the routine never changed. I woke early, worked endlessly, and kept my mouth shut, terrified of making anyone upset. Mr. Collins had a booming voice, and when mistakes happened, he would shout so loudly that my body trembled. Once I burned the rice, and his anger filled the house. I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried until my eyes were swollen. Weeks turned into months, and I became quieter, sadder, almost invisible. I barely spoke to anyone, and even David stopped listening to me. The longing for my family grew unbearable, but David said calling the Philippines was too costly. He allowed me only 1 call a month. I counted the days until that moment, clutching the phone like treasure when I finally heard my mother's voice. Each time I lied to her, saying, "I'm fine, Mama. Everything is okay." But deep inside, nothing was okay. Then, after 3 long months, I discovered I was pregnant. A flood of emotions filled me: fear, joy, and a fragile hope. I thought perhaps the baby would soften hearts, bring the family together, and make David love me more. But nothing changed. Mrs. Collins coldly told me, "Now you must work harder." A strong woman does her chores even when she is pregnant. She offered no kindness, no rest, only more demands. I dragged myself through the days with a heavy body and an aching heart. David continued to side with his parents and never once asked how I felt. When morning sickness left me weak, he simply said, "Rest after the work is done." One morning dizziness struck me so hard that the room spun. I nearly collapsed in the kitchen, my hands trembling and tears spilling from my eyes. Exhausted and frightened, I sank to the floor, realizing how truly alone I was. That night, I placed my hands over my stomach and whispered to the tiny life inside me, "You are not alone. I will protect you. I will stay strong for you." The baby inside me became the light in my darkest days. For the first time in months, I began to dream again. I imagined learning English, finding a job, earning my own money. I longed for a home of my own, a place where no one could shout at me, where my child and I could finally be free. I didn't want my life to be ruled by fear anymore. When my baby was finally born, it was a boy, and I named him Ethan. The moment I saw his tiny face, his soft hair, and those wide brown eyes, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I felt strong. I cradled him close to my chest and whispered to myself, "This is my son. I will protect him no matter what happens." But even after Ethan's birth, the world around me didn't change. I carried every responsibility alone. Mrs. Collins refused to help, saying coldly, "He's your baby, not mine." David returned to work only weeks later, leaving me at home with Ethan, exhausted and hungry most days, yet still pushing forward. Sleep was rare. Meals were small. But I told myself again and again, one day things will be different. One day I will build my own life. At night, when the house was quiet, I often broke down in tears. I held the silver bracelet my mother had given me and pressed it against my skin as if it could carry her warmth across the ocean. "I miss you, Mama," I whispered in the dark. "I promise I'll stay strong." That first year with Ethan tested me in every possible way. He woke often during the night, crying for milk, and every morning I still had to cook, scrub floors, and wash dishes. No one in the house ever offered a hand. Sometimes I felt invisible, less like a person, more like someone hired to work without pay. Mrs. Collins never smiled at Ethan, never held him, never spoke to him with kindness. She only muttered, "Babies are noisy. Keep him quiet." Mr. Collins hardly spoke at all, but the way his eyes lingered on me made me feel unwelcome, as though I didn't belong in his home. Then one night Ethan became sick. His tiny body burned with fever, and panic gripped me. I rushed to David, begging him to take us to a doctor. But he stayed on the couch, his eyes glued to the television screen. "He'll be fine," he muttered. "Just give him water." I sat on the floor that night, rocking Ethan in my arms, terrified that he wouldn't make it until morning. Tears blurred my vision as I prayed over and over, pleading for his fever to break. In that moment I missed my mother more than ever, but it wasn't time yet for my one monthly call. So I sat in the dark, whispering into the silence, "I love you, Mama. I need you." But deep inside I knew she couldn't save me anymore. That was the night I made a decision that changed everything. I realized I had to be stronger. I couldn't keep waiting for someone else to rescue me. If my life was going to change, I had to fight for it myself, for Ethan and for me. The next morning I stood in front of the mirror, hair messy, eyes swollen, and I whispered, "You're a mother now. You cannot give up. You must fight." With that thought burning inside me, I started searching for a way forward. That's when I heard about a community center nearby offering free English classes. I told David about it, my voice shaking but determined. His immediate answer was no. "You're too busy." he said flatly, dismissing me without even looking up. But I didn't stop asking. Day after day, I brought it up until finally, tired of my persistence, he gave in. Fine, he said. But only 2 days a week. The moment he agreed, my heart filled with a spark of joy. When I walked into that classroom for the first time, I saw women from all over the world: Mexico, India, Egypt, and places I had never even heard of. We were all strangers in a new land, and that made me feel less alone. At first I was shy, afraid to speak, worried that I would sound foolish. But I listened carefully, repeating each word like it was gold. I learned how to say simple but important sentences. I need help. I want water. My baby is sick. Every phrase I mastered gave me a new kind of strength. Our teacher, Miss Lisa, was patient and encouraging. When I struggled, she smiled gently and said, "You are smart, Emily. Keep going." Those words echoed in my heart long after class ended. It had been so long since anyone had told me I was capable, that I had potential. Slowly, I began practicing English at home, speaking more with confidence, even when mistakes slipped out. David barely noticed. "Do what you want," he shrugged whenever I mentioned class. Mrs. Collins, however, scowled and sneered. "Why are you trying to be something you're not?" Her words stung, but I refused to stop. For the first time, I was doing something for myself, for my child, and for the future I desperately wanted. Months later, Miss Lisa pulled me aside after class with exciting news. "There's a part-time job opening at a bakery," she said. The thought terrified me. I had never worked outside the house before, but deep down I knew I had to try. I asked David for permission, but his response was filled with doubt. "You won't last a week," he scoffed. I swallowed my fear and went anyway. The bakery was small, but warm and inviting, with the sweet smell of bread drifting through the air. The owner, Miss Grace, greeted me kindly and patiently taught me how to serve coffee, pack bread, and speak to customers. My English was far from perfect, but I smiled, stumbled through sentences, and tried again. To my relief, most customers were patient and kind. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of the world, not just locked away in a house that wasn't mine. I worked 3 hours a day while Ethan stayed with David or Mrs. Collins. I saved every single dollar I earned, treating it as something sacred. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. With my first paycheck, I bought myself a warm winter coat and a little toy for Ethan. For the first time since leaving my home country, I felt proud. Proud of myself, proud of what I could do, and proud of taking one step toward freedom. Work gave me hope, and with hope came new dreams. I began to imagine what life could become. Maybe one day I could get a full-time job, study something meaningful, and rent a small apartment just for me and Ethan. It was only a vision in my mind, but it gave me a reason to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult each day still was. I kept telling myself I wouldn't let fear rule my life anymore. But just as things finally started to look a little brighter, something happened that shook me to the core. One evening, David came home much later than usual, and I immediately noticed something different in his eyes. He had been drinking. The moment he stepped inside, he started yelling, his voice echoing through the small house. Ethan was fast asleep, and I begged him to keep quiet, but instead of listening, his anger grew worse. He slammed his hands on the table and shoved a chair so hard that it scraped loudly across the floor. I froze, my heart racing. I had never seen him like this before. Fear took over, and without thinking, I ran to the bedroom, clutching Ethan tightly in my arms. Inside the room, I locked the door, sat on the floor, and trembled uncontrollably. I realized in that moment that I was no longer safe. Not me and not my son. The next morning, I gathered my courage and told Mrs. Collins what had happened. She looked straight at me with cold eyes and said, "You made him angry. Maybe you should talk less. Her words broke something inside me. I realized she had never cared and she never would. A week later, things became even worse. David and his father argued loudly in the living room about money while I stayed in the kitchen, holding Ethan close. Then Mr. Collins suddenly walked over to me and said words that left me frozen. "If you don't like it here, you can leave," he said flatly. "But the boy stays." My breath caught in my throat. "I'm his mother," I whispered. He didn't blink. "This is David's family. The boy stays with us." My legs felt weak, and for a moment I thought I would collapse right there. I couldn't speak. I just turned and walked away, holding Ethan so tightly that my arms hurt. That night, I rocked him in my arms and cried quietly, whispering over and over, "No one will ever take you from me. I will never let you go." When my monthly call finally came, I told my mother everything. My voice shook with sobs as I poured out my pain, and she wept with me. "Come home, Emily," she pleaded. "We will help you." Her words gave me comfort, but the truth was crushing. I couldn't leave. I had no money, no place to go, and no way to take Ethan out of the country without David's permission. I was trapped, but I refused to surrender. So I kept working. I kept studying English. I saved every single dollar, no matter how small, because I knew it was the only path forward. In my free time, I borrowed children's books from the library, watched simple videos, and practiced speaking out loud until my tongue didn't feel heavy anymore. Miss Lisa helped me fill out forms to apply for a legal residency card, encouraging me with every step. "You're doing so well, Emily," she said warmly. "Don't stop now." At the bakery, Miss Grace noticed my effort and offered me more hours. I gladly accepted and soon began working 5 hours a day. With my own earnings, I bought a second-hand phone and slowly started connecting with other women. Through them, I learned about support groups and resources for women in difficult situations like mine. For the first time since coming to America, I felt a small spark of strength flickering inside me. Yes, I was still living in that cold, quiet house, but I wasn't the same girl who had arrived a year ago. I was changing. I was learning. And most importantly, I was preparing for the day Ethan and I would finally have a life of our own. Every night before bed, I held my son close and whispered promises into his little ears. "One day we'll have our own home. One day you'll wake up smiling every morning. I promise you, Ethan." Those words gave me the courage to keep pushing forward. 2 full years had passed since I had left the Philippines. Life was still heavy, but I was no longer the fragile girl who cried in silence each night. Yes, fear still lingered, but I had also found pieces of my strength. My voice, though small, had started to emerge. And Ethan, now 2 years old, was my reason to keep fighting. He toddled around saying small words, his laughter brightening even the darkest moments. Every giggle reminded me why I had to survive. He was my light in the middle of a storm, the reason I kept dreaming about something better. At the bakery, I had proven myself to be reliable, and Miss Grace trusted me with more responsibilities. She let me handle simple paperwork, organize shelves, and even speak with customers. My English wasn't perfect, but it was far better than when I first arrived. Now I could hold short conversations, ask questions, and understand most of what people said. Through my job, I began meeting women from all over the world. Many of them had stories as heartbreaking as mine, young mothers raising children in homes where they weren't respected or loved. We found comfort in each other, trading stories and encouragement. One of them was Maria, a woman from Mexico who quickly became a dear friend. "You are not alone," she told me one afternoon. "You're doing better than you think." Her words lifted me in ways she probably didn't even realize. One day, Maria invited me to a women's support group she attended. They gathered every Saturday in a small room behind a local church. I was nervous, my hands shaking as I entered, but I forced myself to go. The room was filled with women of every background, some from Asia, others from Africa, and many from South America. Though our stories were different, I could feel their strength in the way they carried themselves. A kind woman named Helen led the group, speaking slowly and listening deeply. When it was my turn to share, my chest tightened. For the first time ever, I told my story out loud to people who weren't my family. My voice cracked, tears poured down my face, and I could barely finish my sentences. But no one judged me. Instead, they nodded, their eyes filled with understanding. They knew exactly what my pain felt like. That night, walking home after the meeting, something felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying my burden alone. And I knew I would return to that group again and again, because it was the first place in America where I truly felt seen. Inside me, something was shifting. Each day I felt a little braver, a little stronger. Helen noticed it too, and one afternoon she introduced me to a free legal aid service. For the first time, I sat in a small office where kind voices explained the law to me. They told me what my rights were as a mother living in America. "No one can take your child away," one of the women said firmly. "You have the right to feel safe." That night, lying awake, I thought about all the moments I had lived through. The yelling, the slammed doors, the sharp cold looks, and the endless silence. Why had I stayed quiet all this time? Why did I smile when inside I was breaking into pieces? Something inside me cracked wide open. I realized it was no longer time to hide or run away. It was time to step forward and finally take control of my life. With Helen's guidance and the support of the legal aid group, I applied for housing. A small apartment meant for single mothers with low income. It was close to the bakery, in a neighborhood where children played safely in the park. I counted my savings over and over until I had enough for the first month's rent. The day came quietly. David was at work when I packed my clothes into 2 bags, gathered Ethan's toys, and slipped my mother's silver bracelet onto my wrist. My hands shook, but my heart beat strong. Mrs. Collins stood in the kitchen as I carried Ethan out the door. She didn't stop me. She only muttered, "You'll come back. You need us." But deep inside, I knew I would never return. Not to that house, not to that life. The chains I had worn for so long were finally breaking. When I unlocked the door to my new apartment, I nearly burst into tears. It was small, just 2 rooms with plain white walls, but it felt like a palace to me. Sunlight streamed through the window, filling the space with warmth I hadn't felt in years. I spread out a simple mat on the floor, laid down a blanket for Ethan, and sat beside him. And then I cried. But these were not tears of fear. This time I cried because I was free. At first, life in the apartment wasn't easy. I had to work, cook, clean, and care for Ethan all by myself. But the truth was I had been doing that all along, only now I did it in peace. No one shouted at me anymore. No one told me I was worthless. In that tiny home I could breathe again. Then one morning I received a letter from the Philippines. As I opened it, my heart stopped. My mother had passed away. I fell to the floor, clutching the paper, sobbing until my chest ached. The memories came rushing back. Her smile, her soft hands, her voice telling me to stay strong. The bracelet she had pressed into my palm before I left. I wept for the calls I didn't make, the visits I couldn't take. For days I mourned, but then I remembered her words echoing in my heart. "Be brave, my daughter." I hugged Ethan close and whispered through my tears, "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm doing my best. I promise I will keep going." From that moment I made a vow. I would live not only for myself and my son but also for the woman who raised me, who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I would live fully, carrying her strength inside me. The months that followed were slow but steady. I worked hard at the bakery, saved what I could, and enrolled Ethan in a small daycare for a few hours a day. He made friends, learned new words, and came home every afternoon with the brightest smile. Watching him grow gave me pride I had never felt before. One afternoon, while I was arranging loaves of bread behind the counter, Miss Grace looked at me and said softly, "You've come a long way, Emily. One day you should think about managing this bakery." I froze, unable to believe what I had heard. Me? A manager? For so long I had seen myself as weak, small, invisible. But maybe, just maybe, I was stronger than I ever imagined. Of course, the past wasn't completely gone. David tried to reach me several times. He called saying, "Come back. Ethan needs his father." But my answer was always the same. "No," I said firmly. "You had your chance. I'm doing what's best for us now." Even after I hung up, the memories sometimes clawed at me. Yes, I still cried when I thought of my mother. Yes, pain still came back on quiet nights. But those tears were different now. They weren't from fear. They were from healing, from remembering, from growing into someone new. And every morning, when I opened my eyes and saw Ethan breathing softly beside me, I smiled. I would rise, make tea, prepare for work, and face the day with quiet strength. This was our life now, simple, modest, but finally ours. And though I wasn't rich and didn't own much, I had something far greater. I had peace. I had freedom. I had a son who loved me more than anything. I had friends who stood by me. And most of all, I had myself. And that, I realized, was enough. The days in my little apartment slowly turned into months, and months into years. Life was not perfect, but it was mine. Every morning I woke up, made breakfast for Ethan, and felt thankful that we had peace. He was growing fast. At 3 years old, he loved running around the park near our apartment. He laughed when the wind blew his hair, and every sound of his joy reminded me why I had chosen freedom. I worked long hours at the bakery, sometimes staying until the evening to help Miss Grace. She trusted me with more responsibilities, handling money, talking to suppliers, even training new workers. The shy girl who once struggled to say, "I need help," in English was now giving instructions with confidence. Still, there were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what more I could do for my son. I didn't want him to only see me working and struggling. I wanted him to see me dreaming. So I began to study again. After Ethan went to sleep, I opened borrowed books and practiced writing English sentences. Some nights I fell asleep at the table, pen still in my hand, but I kept going. One Saturday at the support group, Helen said, "Emily, you've come so far. Have you ever thought about sharing your story to help other women?" Her words made my heart race. Me? Tell my story? For years I had lived in silence. But now silence was no longer my prison. Slowly I started speaking up at meetings, telling pieces of my life. How I came here, how I fought to be free, how I learned to build again. Every time I shared, I saw other women nodding, their eyes filled with tears. I realized that my voice, once broken, had power. Ethan was now 4, then 5. He began preschool, bringing home colorful drawings of houses, trees, and smiling families. One day he held up a picture and said, "This is me and Mommy." There were just 2 figures on the page, but both had wide, happy smiles. I hung it on the wall like a treasure. At the bakery, life grew busier. Miss Grace, who was getting older, often leaned on me for help. She said one afternoon, "Emily, I see you as family. If something ever happens to me, I want you to take care of this bakery." My chest tightened with emotion. This small shop, with its smell of fresh bread and coffee, had been the first place where I felt useful, where I began to believe in myself again. And now it might one day be mine. But life is never a straight path. One evening, as I was closing up the bakery, I saw a familiar figure outside. David. My stomach dropped. He looked older, worn down, but his eyes were sharp. "Emily," he said, "I want to see my son." For a moment fear gripped me. The old memories, the shouting, the threats, all rushed back. But then I felt Ethan's drawing in my mind, the one where we smiled together. I stood tall. "You can't just walk back into our lives," I told him. "You had your chance and you lost it. Ethan is happy and I will protect him." He tried to argue, his voice rising, but I didn't flinch. Inside me, the scared girl was gone. I was a mother, a worker, a fighter. And I was not going back. After that night, I filed papers with the help of Helen's group and the legal aid office. The law was on my side now. No one could take Ethan away. For the first time, I felt untouchable. The years kept moving forward. Ethan turned 6, then 7. He brought home little awards from school. Best smile. Most helpful. Great reader. Each paper filled me with pride so deep it brought tears to my eyes. I continued working at the bakery, and soon Miss Grace made me the manager. I hired new workers, kept the accounts, and even started creating new recipes. Customers began asking for Emily's bread and Emily's cakes. My name was slowly becoming part of the bakery's story. One day, Miss Grace called me into her office. Her eyes were soft but serious. "Emily, I've decided it's time for me to retire. I want to sell this bakery, but not to strangers. I want to sell it to you." I couldn't breathe. Me? Owning a bakery? Sounded impossible. But she smiled and said, "You've worked harder than anyone I know. I'll make sure the price is something you can handle. This place belongs to you now." I went home that night and hugged Ethan so tight he laughed. "Mama, why are you squeezing me?" he giggled. "Because," I whispered, "dreams are starting to come true." With every dollar I had saved and with help from the support group, I bought the bakery. The papers had my name on them. For the first time in my life, something big and important truly belonged to me. I painted the walls fresh white, put flowers in the windows, and renamed it Ethan's Bakery. When the sign went up, Ethan clapped his hands and shouted, "That's my name!" The bakery became more than a place for bread. It became a safe space. Women from the support group came to work there. Mothers brought their children, knowing it was a kind environment. It was a home built on second chances. One afternoon, as I wiped the counter, Helen walked in. She looked around at the busy shop, the laughter, the warm smell of coffee. Then she turned to me and said, "Emily, do you see what you've done? You've built not just a bakery, but a future." Her words sank deep into my heart. The girl who once arrived in America with nothing now stood in her own bakery. Her son running between the tables, her life full of hope. Years passed. Ethan grew taller, his laughter deeper. He became my partner in everything, helping me bake, writing little signs for the shop, greeting customers with his big brown eyes. I often caught myself looking at him and whispering, "This is why I never gave up." Sometimes at night, I still held my mother's silver bracelet. I wished she could see us. I wished she could walk into the bakery and taste the bread. But in my heart I knew she was with me. Every success, every smile carried her spirit. One evening, as the sun set through the bakery windows, Ethan asked me, "Mama, are you happy now?" I looked at him, at the life we had built, and tears filled my eyes. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm happy. And I'm proud." Looking back, I saw the road I had walked, the fear, the silence, the pain. But I also saw the courage, the small steps, the victories. I realized that healing was not one big moment. It was every little choice I made to keep moving forward. Now, my story is not only mine. It belongs to every woman who has ever felt trapped, voiceless, or afraid. It is proof that even in the darkest night, there is always a way to find the morning. I am Emily. I am a mother. I am free. And I am strong. And that is the ending of my story. Not a perfect life, not a fairy tale, but a real life rebuilt piece by piece with courage, love, and hope.